Hello and welcome to the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh's 2022 commemoration of Yom HaShoah V'Hagvura, a memorial to the Holocaust and heroism. In 2020, we offered our first online commemoration. As we began to appreciate the potential of virtual programs to include more community members and students, we envisioned a commemoration for this year that will make the most of ongoing physical separation to bring the community together. I want to thank leadership of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, our chair Barbara Shapira, Danny Shapira, the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh, our generous donors and sponsors, our Life and Legacy Society, the Yom HaShoah Committee, individuals who work so hard each year to make sure that this is a meaningful and fitting commemoration, teachers and students of the Light Education Initiative, who interviewed survivors, liberators, and their children for tonight's program. I'd also like to thank the staff of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, Claire Holthouse, Jackie Reese, Christina Sahovi, Noah Schoen, Marcel Walker, Ryan Woodward, Nick Haberman, Roman Benti, Nicole Smar, and Doug Corey. These last four are part of the Light Education Initiative, and it's through Light that we were able to bring so many students into our program tonight. Without this incredible team, we would not be able to do what we do. Over the past year, we've lost many of our Holocaust survivors. One absence is keenly felt today. Agnes Roche, who along with her husband George sponsored our Yom HaShoah program for decades, passed away on April 11th, 2022, this month. She did not often speak of her experience as a 16-year-old in Hungary, separated from her family and true love George. Miraculously, the two reconnected at Bergen-Belsen in the waning days of the Shoah. They went on to marry and establish themselves in Paris, where they had 2 children. In the early 1960s, they made their way to Pittsburgh, where their impact has long been felt. May their memories be for a blessing. Somewhat miraculously, we were able to record an interview with Agnes and her daughter Veronica Schmerling for last year's Yom HaShoah commemoration. That interview and full interviews that you will see parts of this evening will be available on the Holocaust Center's YouTube channel. Join us now as we honor the memories of 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust, celebrate the resilience of survivors, and thank the righteous among the nations and liberators of the Nazi camps. We will remember. Nizkor.
Good evening. On behalf of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, its advisory board and staff, it's my honor to welcome all of you to the 2022 Yom HaShoah program. On this day each year, we take the time to remember the victims of the Holocaust, as well as to honor the survivors, the liberators, the veterans, and the righteous among the nations, the non-Jews, who helped to save Jews during the Holocaust. My name is David Feingold, and I'm honored to serve as the 19th president of Chatham University, which is now the academic home for the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. Thanks to this partnership, we've been able to launch new minors in Jewish studies and Holocaust and genocide studies that help us ensure that our current and future students have both the understanding of the causes of the Holocaust and the tools and capabilities to combat identity-based violence and discrimination in all its forms. Over 2 years ago, in the spring of 2020, the Holocaust Center had planned to mark 75-year anniversary of the end of World War II by doing a Yom HaShoah program to honor the liberators who helped to bring an end to the Holocaust. Alas, the rapid spread of the COVID global pandemic meant that an in-person program was no longer possible. And so these plans had to be modified, and the dream of honoring the liberators deferred. Little did we know at that time that when we came back together tonight, it would be in the midst of a major land war in Europe, bringing back painful memories of World War II 75 years ago, and threatening the lives of those few remaining Holocaust survivors who have elected to stay in the Ukraine. Given that we still have liberators living in our region willing to share their stories, we thought it would be fitting to celebrate these heroes today by giving local students the unique opportunity to interview them and mark this year's Yom HaShoah. This year's program, the Liberators and the Liberated, will feature student leaders from the Light Education Initiative schools across the region, interviewing liberators and their relatives. It will include a liberator of the Dachau concentration camp, a liberator of a German forced labor camp, as well as the daughter of a liberator of a camp within the Buchenwald system, and the son of a Jewish refugee who later returned to Germany as part of the US Army's denazification efforts, sharing their unique stories of liberation. We will also be honoring, as always, this evening, the survivors of the Holocaust by having 6 of them join us for the candle lighting ceremony in memory of the more than 6 million Jews who lost their lives during the Holocaust. Thank you again for joining us this evening. As the years go on, we may always remember these stories, and may we never forget. Thank you.
We continue with Ani Ma'amin. Please join me. Ani Ma'amin, Ani Ma'amin, Ani Ma'amin, B'emona shelema, Beviat HaMashiach, Beviat HaMashiach, Ani Ma'amin, V'af al pi sheyitmamea, Im kol ze ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin. As I chant the memorial prayer, if you're able to rise, please do so at this time. El Maleh Rachamim, Shochen Bamramim, Hamitzei Minucha Nechona, Tachat Kanefei Hashkinah, B'ma'alot Kiroshim Otohorim Kizarakia Masirim Et Nishmot Kalacheinu B'nei Yisrael Anashim, Nashim V'taf, Shenitbechu, V'shenachneku, V'shenistrofu, V'shenergo, B'galei Dendehi, Minuchatam, Anna Bal Harachamim, Hasirem Beseter Genafecha Leolamim, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו ושלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר Amen. You may be seated.
Okay, Eloise, my name's Gene Corey. I was born in a town called Latrobe, Pennsylvania. And at an early age, my family moved to Homestead because of working in economic opportunities. And I lived in Homestead in Mount Hall, what they call the Triborough, all my life. I went to what's called Mount Hall High School. Later, after serving 2 or 3 years in the service, I attended Edinburgh College and later University of Pittsburgh, and then went into the educational field. That's a little bit about me.
Okay, describe your initial thoughts and reactions upon entering the Adenodorn camp at Liberation.
We were taken by surprise. During combat and during fighting, you never know where you're going, whether you're walking or you're going by truck or train, whatever it may be. And all of a sudden, we moved into this area and we hear all this screaming and excitement. Well, so were we excited because it was an excitement of good feeling and good feeling. And as we moved in there, all the prisoners jumped out of their cabins and whatnot, greeted us and hugged us, and it was really a feeling that's hard to describe how excited you were that you were able to free these people from the camps. And one of the things they wanted some food. That way I can remember that. Do you have anything to eat? Well, we didn't have very much. We had what they call sea rations. They were in little cans, and most of them were corned beef hash. And later on, during the end of the war, at least they gave you a variety with chicken soup and chili. So we were able to share with them the sea rations that we had, because evidently in camp they weren't feeling very well. I mean, weren't being fed very well. But that was a satisfying experience. In one case, we came a young man on the riverbanks of the Rhine River, and it was obvious that he wanted to get across in a rowboat to get across the river to alert the German troops that were there. And war makes people nasty. Even if you're an American, if war makes it's ugly. And some of them wanted to shoot that little kid because he was going over to report us on the other side of the Rhine River. And lucky enough of us had common sense that says, no, he's so little, we carried him across and brought him back to what we thought was his home. And but then all those, interesting enough, one reason we knew the war was ended that relates to that is coming up the street, the soldiers were kids. They were 8th graders and 9th graders. We knew they were so desperate they were reaching into the high school and junior high school level for replacements. That was the first sign we knew the war was coming to an end.
Wow.
We read about war and we talk about war, but unless you experience it. For example, when I was in school, we talked about displaced persons, but that meant nothing to me. The term didn't mean anything to me. Look, when we were there, and as we freed each community, we located a lot of camps of displaced persons. These were persons that the Germans brought in, basically slave laborers, right? So at one point we're in the truck, and all of a sudden, hundreds of people, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, 50, 60 people jumped on a truck. Well, we panicked. We thought we were being ambushed by the Germans. Here it was the displaced persons that got released, and they're the ones that told us that Roosevelt died. We didn't have that communication. How these displaced persons knew that Roosevelt died, I have no idea. And the second time we got jumped on, they told us the war was over. How the displaced persons, what system of communication had, I have no idea, okay? But they brought us to the United States for 2 weeks, then they shipped us to the Pacific, to the Philippine Islands. So remember I told you the 60 days only in Europe, that was that tail end of the war. So we're heading over ready to invade Japan. And the rumors were a big part of the Army life. You didn't know whether they were true. How they started, I don't know. But all of a sudden the rumors on the ship was we invented some kind of magic bomb. You know, it's gonna end the war. Well, it turned out to be the atom bomb, naturally. But the atom bomb was dropped while we were on ship heading for Japan. Okay? And then the word came out that was the end of the war, the Japanese war. So actually, then when we got to Japan, our job was to bring out the Japanese soldiers who were hiding in the jungles. When they were in the jungles, they didn't know the war was over. And our job was to search those and bring them out.
How has that experience of liberating a camp and any other experience during your time serving in Germany affected your life since?
It affected me. It gave me an appreciation for human beings, okay? War is hell, okay? People become nasty, people become ugly. And it gave me a feeling that, you know, we can't survive unless we have a better relations with each other as human beings. And always remember that that I respect everybody as individual, race, color, creed, or whatever, enemy or friend. We're humans, and that feeling I got for people was part of that experience.
That's really powerful. What is the most important lesson you want me and other young people to learn from your experiences?
I think the most important thing is, and I think that's been my motto ever since, is the respect of each individuals, and the respect for their rights and their experiences, and that there's more ways of solving conflict than violence. And I still preach that today. In all my experiences, I try to overcome the violence that existed through communication and through relationships and those kinds of things, right? Mm-hmm.
I was just out of high school and I was working in the machine shop. I wanted to be a machinist, and that was something that I did before the war, and even after the war I stayed with that trade. And but I was 20 years old and I got drafted. And
Can you describe your initial thoughts and reactions upon entering Dock now?
Most of the people that were in there with me, they had been in the military since we even started in Sicily, an invasion there. So when we went in, we saw a lot of things that we were not prepared to see. We not only saw the people who were surviving, but we saw many people who had died. They were dying in there every hour. So it was very, very emotional. It was just a thing that we didn't have the words to explain how we felt or anything, but I can remember that some of the soldiers, when they saw the things that had happened there, all the atrocities and things like that had happened, they did a couple of things. A lot of them started to vomit, a lot of them cried, and a lot of us did both. We were just not prepared to see anything like we saw in that camp. And what I heard most of all in the beginning, there were people there from all nationalities, from all different countries. And I saw the people, like the Polish people, they would gather together because they could speak their language. And they didn't know what was going on for a while, because so what we saw there was just people talking with each other. You could smell the burning flesh of the people, and that is something that we were not used to. We were not trained for that. It was just something that was just out of this ordinary. Things we saw and smelled and saw people. There was so much chaos in there. There was so much confusion at the time. But the guards that were left, they were at one part of the camp called the coal yard wall. And the coal was there to fire up those ovens, fire up the furnaces where they burnt the people's bodies. And they were told to stand in line. There were 58 of them altogether, those guards that were standing there. And there was so much confusion going on. They stood for a little while, and then one or two of them moved ahead, moved out of the line, just moved ahead. And then some of the soldiers opened up with fire with cart. But when things cleared up, we had our Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks. He saw the confusion going on there, and he come nearby and he pulled out his .45 and he started firing it up in the air. And finally, he said that there'll be no more firing. Everybody hold your fire. These people are surrendering. No matter what they did or who they are, you don't kill them like that in cold blood. He said, just stop the firing. So he did that. So we were around those people, the guards and everything like that. So when they all fell to the ground and things cleared up, they all stood up, but only 18 of them didn't get up. They were killed, about 18 of them out of those 58. So right there, that was probably the only ones that were killed in that camp. Maybe between 50 or 60 people altogether were killed. So it wasn't a place like it was going to be a big battle or anything. This was a camp where they were going to surrender, and they knew that that was going to happen. So we did have contact with some of those men, some of those guards and everything, and it showed us the gas chamber and into the different parts of the camp and show us what they had to do and what they did with a lot of the bodies and how they were cremated and how they were killed. But we had heard about different places. We heard about Buchenwald, we heard about Auschwitz in Poland, we heard about concentration camps from other soldiers. We heard, but we didn't know that we were ever going to be in one of them. And to see what we saw and experiment the different things that went on in that camp. It was just something that was beyond description. You just couldn't imagine. You couldn't fathom anything that would be happening to people. So, but the ones that survived out of there, we weren't allowed to give them any food at all. They were so undernourished that the medics told us that if you gave them any food, that would probably kill them. So what we were allowed to do, we could give them cigarettes and we could give them hardtack candy. Now, the unit that I was in, the 45th Division, you could check me out on that. We had 511 days in combat. So that's a lot of days to go from one battle to another. And when you're over there that long, you're about ready. I stayed in another 6 months. I was with the outfit for 3.5 years. And then we went from Dachau to Munich. And like I say, there wasn't much fighting, much resistance there. Munich is, I think, the third largest city in Germany, and it was bombed so heavily from the air that when we went in there was only a few tanks left. There was some snipers around there, but hardly any resistance. So, but by then, it got to be May the 8th, and that's when the war ended. The war ended in Europe on May the 8th, but it was still ongoing in the Pacific. So, but there were different places that I had been in, different things that we had seen, and some of the battles were large, some of them were smaller, just skirmishes, but war is a bad thing, no matter where you're at and what happens. A lot of things can happen, so there was one thing that bothered me more than anything else. Whenever I came home, they had automobiles that sometimes the timing on a car would backfire, would make a loud noise. And whenever I heard that, I wanted to jump off the curb and dive into a ditch or something like that, because that stays with you for a long time, those explosions, when you get hit by artillery or some kind of weapon. And it's just automatic that your life changes that way. But I can still remember a lot of things. There are a lot of things that you want to forget, but a lot of things you can't forget. But that is one thing in Dachau, that you can never forget those things that happened. Yeah.
My father never really talked about the war to us when I was growing up. I was probably a young adult when he would start having conversations about it with me. The first time he ever spoke public was 21 years ago. After that, I used to take him to his Army reunions, and he was talking to a friend of his that was in his unit. And Van told him, anytime you get a chance to speak to young people, please do so, because they need to know these things. They need to know what happened so that it doesn't happen again. So many people try to say that these stories are not true, and they are. And we don't ever want to see it happen again. Thank you.
My dad was born in Germany in 1925, which was 8 years before Hitler came to power. And although he was Jewish, he had a very normal, very typical early childhood, those first 8 years. No different than all of the other kids his age in the town in Germany where he was living. But his life changed very dramatically in 1933, which was when Hitler came to power. He and his family experienced several years of discrimination, of persecution, of oppression. My grandfather lost his job and wound up spending 6 weeks in a concentration camp. But in 1939, my dad and his family got permission to immigrate to the United States. So they came here and started to live in New York. And then in 1944, in June of 1944, my dad graduated from high school and enlisted in the U.S. Army. My dad, when he joined the U.S. Army, was put into a group called the Military Government Security Guard. And what that group did was they followed the tank division of the U.S. Army. And their responsibility was to establish and maintain order in the parts of Germany that had become occupied by U.S. forces. So in April of 1945, my dad and his team arrived in the German city of Leipzig. And shortly after they got there, they were asked to investigate a camp that was located outside the city called the Tekla camp. The Tekla camp was a forced labor camp. About 300 laborers lived there while working in a nearby factory. And they were foreigners, primarily from Poland, Belgium, and France. So what my dad expected when he got to the camp, he expected to find 300 overworked, underfed foreigners eager to be released. But that's not what he saw when he got there. Because the night before, the US forces arrived in Leipzig, the guards at this camp forced all of the laborers into a building, then nailed boards over the doors and windows of the building and set the building on fire. Most of the laborers died in the blaze. Some of them tried to escape by crawling through a latrine ditch, but they were shot dead when they emerged from the building. So, for your question, what were his initial thoughts and reactions? My dad was shocked. He was horrified. He couldn't believe that human beings would do this to other human beings. He really couldn't understand how the guards could possibly have justified their actions. And he wondered, how could anyone have let this happen? Or how could anyone have participated in such a terrible activity?
As high school students are not much younger than your father was at that time when he was in service, what impact do you think that experience had on your father then, given that he was still a young adult?
Yeah, I do think it was very traumatic for my dad at that age to see what happened at the Tekla labor camp. My dad said that what he saw there at that camp was permanently etched in his mind. He could see every detail clearly, even 50 years later. And after he visited the camp, he had recurring nightmares where he saw the bodies of the victims. And it really disturbed my dad that the guards at this camp were probably the same age as him. In fact, he wondered whether some of those cold-hearted murderers, those guards, were actually schoolmates of his from his old hometown in Germany. And years later, when my dad started to speak about the Holocaust, he mostly spoke about his life as a Jewish boy in Nazi Germany. He very rarely spoke about what happened at the Tekla labor camp, about what he witnessed as a US soldier. I think that my dad was still traumatized by that camp 50 years after he was there.
My question is, what impact, if any, did being Jewish specifically have on your father as he took part in the war and the denazification effort?
So the entire reason my dad joined the army was because he was Jewish and German. And he wanted to fight back against Nazi Germany. He actually enlisted in the army. Since he wasn't a US citizen when he graduated from high school, he couldn't be drafted. He had to volunteer. My dad remembered that those years that he was happily living in Germany before Hitler came to power, he was just a normal kid, just like all the other kids in Germany. And the Nazis turned him into an outsider, declared that he was an enemy of the country. So my dad felt this unfair persecution of the Jews had to be stopped. And he felt that the people who had ruined the country where he was born had to be brought to justice.
What is the most important lesson that you think your father would want me and other young people to learn from his experience?
Well, I think the single lesson that my father would want people to learn is don't be a passive bystander. When you witness injustice or persecution or bullying or discrimination, you need to act. You don't have to jump right in and possibly put yourself in danger, but you should find a way to do something to support the person or people who are being harmed. To be silent is to be complicit. And my dad felt that there were millions of ordinary German citizens during World War II who were complicit, who were just sat by and passively did nothing as the Nazis persecuted the Jews in Germany. And there are a number of Jews who afterwards were extremely resentful towards Germans afterwards. My dad did not resent someone simply because they were German. My dad actually, especially once he started volunteering to speak about the Holocaust, met many people from Germany who were very upset about what their parents had done, or what others had done when they were younger, and were trying to make amends in some way. And my dad was always very appreciative of those people who, once they understood what the other people in Germany had done, had tried to make reparations or amends in some way. As I had mentioned earlier, I think one of the things he did not forgive people about was when they stood by and did nothing, even if they weren't actively persecuting the Jews. If they were there and did nothing to stop it, he did feel like those people should have done something.
So I'm going to tell you today a little bit about my father, Bob Ramey. He was born in Peoria, Illinois on April 1st, 1925. And in high school, my father was really concerned about the draft. So World War II was raging and nearly every young man was being drafted. And my dad thought he could actually potentially delay or perhaps avoid the draft by going to college. Sometimes if you were in college, you could delay or avoid getting drafted. So he actually never graduated from high school. He left early and he went to Purdue University during what would have been the last semester of his high school years in the winter of 1943. But the minute he turned 18, he immediately got drafted. And this is actually a photo of him visiting his family before he left, with his mother and his sister looking pretty miserable there, holding on to him pretty tightly. He served in the 89th Infantry Division, which wound up playing a really important role in the liberation of the camps. His division landed on the coast of France on January 21st, 1945. So this is in the middle of the winter. Their medic was killed almost immediately after he stepped on a landmine on a tennis court. And my father then became the medic for his unit. He had absolutely no training, but they made him the medic. He's in the center of the photo there on the right, holding his medic helmet, and you can see the Red Cross armband that he's wearing in both of these photos. After the war, my dad came back from Europe and he went to Yale and Northwestern on the GI Bill. He worked at IBM in the 1950s. He actually developed some of the world's very first computers. And he came to Pittsburgh to study computer science at Carnegie Tech, which is now Carnegie Mellon University, with Alan Newell, who's considered the father of artificial intelligence. So my dad actually stayed and worked as a computer engineer for his whole career at Carnegie Mellon. And he was a gentle man. He loved animals. He loved his family. He liked to build things and solve math problems and do engineering puzzles, just to give you a sense of who he was. My father he didn't really talk about the war, and he didn't stay in touch with anyone from the war. He never joined the VFW or went to any veterans events. It really was not part of his identity in any way. He had nightmares from time to time, but he wouldn't talk about it, even with my mother. He went to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and this was just about 2 years after the museum had opened. So it was still very new. And it was the 50th anniversary of the liberation of the camps. And my dad was so touched and so moved by the tribute to the Liberators. That's a photo of him holding the 89th Division flag with the rolling W of his unit. My mother said that trip really helped him feel better, and he almost seemed to relax a little bit after that. So I'm very grateful that he had that chance to visit the Holocaust Museum and sort of have that closure.
So I have a question about when they were going into the camp. Since it was the first camp that was liberated, did the Americans and your father like know what they were getting into? Or was it just like the horrors weren't even known?
Yeah. It's a really important question. And I'm not sure how much the soldiers themselves would have been told, within the chain of command, within the military. I'm really not sure if they on the front lines knew what was coming, but certainly general knowledge was out there, right, about this. The world, however, there were people already starting to say that this wasn't happening, that this wasn't real. And I think they knew that. And certainly the generals knew that. And that's one of the reasons that they came personally to this camp. And we know that there would have been a lot of nauseating smells of charred bodies and decomposing bodies, and the horrific sights, right? So horrible that even a week later, these famous generals, when General Eisenhower, General Patton came to visit the camp, they couldn't even go in the buildings to see these things. And they did reportedly throw up, that it was so upsetting. So I can only imagine what these 18 and 19 and 20-year-old young men saw and smelled.
So we're not a whole lot younger than your father was when he was liberating the camp. What impact do you think that experience had on your father, given that he was still a young adult?
I think that this was almost incomprehensible violence. Right? Horror. So horrible that he really wasn't able to talk about it for the rest of his life. I don't think he could ever make sense of the violence and how horrific people could be to each other. So I think he spent the rest of his life really modeling what peace looks like and how do you build peace with other human beings who don't look like you, who are different from you. He didn't preach that, but he modeled it.
What is the most important lesson that you think your father would want me and other young people to learn from his experience?
So the one thing my father said to me when I did ask him about his experience during the war, he said directly to me, I had two brothers, and he said, I fought that war so you kids would never have to fight another. And I've thought about that for a long time. I've thought about it my whole life, right? It's a really simple statement, but it really is complex if you think about it, right? I think it really is a charge to all of us to think about how to be peacemakers and what does it mean to not fight another war. So how do we prevent war? How do we build peace? And I think that was his perspective on that war, that it was just so horrifying that we had to work to make sure we never had to ever fight another one.
So the next.
My name is Oskar Singer. I'm born in Poland. In Poland, Radomish Wielki. And my daughter will light the candles for my father and mother, three brothers, and my sister.
I am lighting a candle for my father's entire family who died in the Holocaust in Poland.
My name is Moshe Baran. I was born in Poland in a small town that's not far from Minsk. And I light this candle in the memory.
Together, we light this candle in memory of all of my other family, hometown, the shtetl, all the victims of the Holocaust, and we continue to pray for peace and for such things never to happen again.
And I must say that I was fortunate in this respect, as many people didn't, that I was able to rescue my mother, my brother, my sister. My mother was the only mother who survived from my hometown of 300 families, and I don't have enough words in my vocabulary how to describe it.
My name is Abraham Judah Samet. I was born in Debrecen, Hungary in 1938, February the 5th of 1938 again. And I'm lighting this candle in memory of my father, Kalman Yekutiel Samet, who died approximately 2-3 days after liberation, and also in honor of my mother, who died at an old age. Because of her, I'm still alive.
Good evening. My name is Debbie Leuchter-Stuber, and I'm a child of survivors, Edith and Kurt Leuchter. And I'll let them speak now.
I'm Edith Leuchter. I'm from Bruxelles, Germany, and I'm lighting the candle for my mother and my brother who were killed in Auschwitz.
I am Kurt Leuchter. I'm from Vienna, Austria, and my parents were killed in 1942 in Auschwitz.
Hello, my name is Stephen Fenves. I was born in Subotica, Yugoslavia, between my 13th and 14th birthday. I was in 2 ghettos, 3 concentration camps, 3 train rides in boxcars, and 1 death march until the last camp, Buchenwald, where I was liberated. I lived in Pittsburgh for 27 years. I was the founding president of the Pittsburgh Holocaust Survivors Association, which eventually was absorbed by the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. I light these candles for Clara Gereb Fenves, my mother, Louis Fenves, my father, Mary Tausig Gereb, my grandmother, Elizabeth Baruch Fenves, my aunt, Paul Fenves, and Robert Zoltan, my first cousins, Paul Ingus, my best friend, George Kaufman, my distant cousin and friend, George Nodge, another good friend, Mr. Abram Vadoi, our religious school teacher, and all my classmates from the grade school and the religious school, of whom I believe 3 of us boys and 2 girls survived.
Hi, my name is Bella Eisenberg Schachter. I was born in Berhomet, Bukovina. I was almost 2 years when we were thrown out from our homes from Bukovina to Transnistria. It was my parents and one of my sisters, who's older, 3 years older. As much as I remember, there was a lady on our walk to the concentration camp who came over to my mom, she kept me in her arms and asked for her to give me to her. But my mom said, no way, I'm gonna die and she's gonna die with me. So it was a little bit sad. On our walk to Transnistria, my mom saw her parents floating in the Dniester, which was the river where a lot of Jews were driven in and they were killed. My grandparents my grandfather had his shawl on his neck, and my mom started screaming. She wanted to run after them, but she was kept back from the people who drove us. And that was in 1941. I was born in 1938. So I was a little child, like 2.5 years old. We were there for 3.5 years till 1944 when we were liberated. I don't remember much when I left, but I remember everything when we walked back from Transnistria to Chernovitz, because my mom was pregnant and my father and my mom stayed in Chernovitz so she would have the baby. My grandmother, my father's mom, took us by our hands. It was me, my sister, and we walked to Strojanets. I'm gonna light a candle right now from my maternal grandparents. My mom's name was Pappy Pearl Kupferschmidt. My grandfather was Schloime Kupferschmidt. And I'm gonna light the candle for them in their memory. I cannot remember them, but it was a very sad 3.5 years, which I remember suffering for cold, no food, being scared that we're gonna get killed. And with that, I'm gonna leave this meeting because my heart is breaking. Thank you.
My name is Rabbi Mark Asher Goodman. I am the director of Derech and Youth Tefillah at Congregation Beth Shalom here in Pittsburgh, as well as the senior rabbi of Brith Shalom Congregation in Erie, Pennsylvania. On this Yom HaShoah commemorating 77 years since the end of the Holocaust in Europe, we remember the millions of individuals, Jewish, Roma, homosexual, political prisoners, and all other individuals who were picked out and victimized for who they were and who they longed to be. We commemorate them with a Kaddish. In specific, I just wanted to add that as a third-generation survivor, my grandmother is a Holocaust survivor from Poland. her and her sister were the only survivors from their small village of Raków, Poland. We lost my great-grandmother, my great-grandfather, 2 great uncles, and 3 great other great aunts. This moment feels heavier and higher for me each and every year, as I imagine for the entire Jewish community, it feels as well. With that, Kaddish Yatom. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah, Be'alma Tivra Chirutei V'yamlich Malchutei, B'chayechon uvyomechon uvchaye dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala uvizman ka'ariv v'imru Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevorach Le'olam Olmei Olmaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal Shmei Dekudsha Barichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, Da'amiran be'alma v'imru Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba min Shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru Amen.
$27,921 individuals have been recognized as righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Authority in Jerusalem, as of April 2022. More than 27,000 non-Jews risked their lives and the lives of their families to save their Jewish strangers, friends, and neighbors. The righteous among the nations came from all religions and walks of life. They saw beyond religious differences and acted to save lives. In a recent news story, we find an example of rescue during the Holocaust, inspiring a family in Israel to provide a new home for women fleeing Ukraine. Just last month, in March of 2022, an Israeli woman took in the Ukrainian granddaughters of the heroes who saved her family during the Holocaust. Sharon Bass grew up hearing her grandmother Fanya's stories about her rescuer, Maria Blischik, who took in Fanya after she escaped the Nazis. Fanya Bass fed her village just before all of its 2,500 Jewish residents were captured by the Nazis. Fanya had been living in a forest for close to a year when the Blischiks found her in 1943.
Of her grandmother's rescuers, Sharon Bass said, "If the Nazis had found out that they had been giving refuge to my grandmother, they would have killed the whole family. They hid her for 2 years. From the moment they came to Israel, my grandparents were involved in many charities and tried to help people in need, like the Blischiks helped my grandmother in the Holocaust. What I am doing now is like giving back, just a little bit of what my grandparents gave to others and the righteous family in Ukraine gave to them. I feel that because of them, I am here. Tonight, we honor all who have the courage to help the stranger, as well as their friend and neighbor. We light this candle in honor of the righteous among the nations who rescued Jews during the Holocaust. Whoever saves a life, it is considered as if he saved an entire world."
In the waning days of World War II, the Allied forces liberated millions of Jews and others who had been persecuted in Nazi-controlled Europe, imprisoned in concentration and extermination camps, forced labor camps, marooned in hiding for their safety, and other places of confinement. The liberators were not prepared for what they discovered, and the images of the camps would stay with them and haunt them for the duration of their lives. They were told to move on with their lives when they returned from battle, and they were reluctant to discuss what they had seen. Very few were able to articulate their experiences, but we have had the privilege of hearing from 2 liberators still with us, as well as the children of 2 others today. It is with sincere gratitude that we honor today Guy Crestia, a Dachau liberator and native son of Western Pennsylvania, who regularly shares his harrowing story with his students and adults alike, and joined by his daughter, Patty. Eugene Corey, a liberator of the Adenodorn forced labor camp, who later went on to have a long and successful career as an educator after serving in the war. Robert Ramey, a liberator of the Ohrdruf subcamp in the Buchenwald system, and the first Nazi camp liberated by US troops, as told through the voice and recollections of his daughter, Dr. Jessie Ramey. And Fritz Ottenheimer, a Jewish refugee who fled Nazi Germany and later returned with the US Army to assist with the denazification efforts and long-term liberation in Europe, told through the voice and memories of his son, Dan. In addition to these 4 liberators, we also remember and acknowledge the thousands of other Allied liberators at sea. We thank them for their service, compassion, and humanity in the face of unimaginable horrors. And we remember, of course, all those they liberated, as well as the souls they were too late to rescue in time. I light this candle in honor of the brave soldiers, medical corps, military intelligence officers, and others who liberated prisoners of the Nazis, rendered aid to those in need, continued liberation efforts on the European continent in the ensuing years, and ushered survivors into their lives after the Holocaust.
More than 16 million men and women served in United States Armed Forces during World War II. Over 400,000 service members perished while serving our country during the war years, and another 670,000 were wounded. They fought in Europe, Asia, and Africa, and when the war was over, they stayed on in those regions to rebuild. These men and women were raised during the Great Depression, where every penny was priceless and every meal appreciated. They grew up to enter World War II with the belief that they could preserve the safety and restore the economy of the United States while also liberating other nations overseas, maintaining peace throughout the world, and fostering democracy and stability abroad.
They have been dubbed the greatest generation in hindsight for everything they experienced in just a few short decades as children and young adults. Many of these World War II veterans from our country returned home to attend college or purchase houses on the GI Bill, building better lives for their own families and truly embodying the definition of the American dream. For Yom HaShoah, when we remember the Holocaust and the heroism, the liberators and the liberated, it is a fitting time to recognize and honor all of the Allied veterans of World War II, without whom the war would not have been won and the Holocaust would not have ended. We light this candle in honor of the men and women who courageously fought, came to the aid of the ill and wounded, served and died in the battles of World War II, and the men and women whose work fortified the home front.
Never say that you now go on your last way, though darkened skies may now conceal the blue of day, because the hour for which we've hungered is so near. Beneath our feet the earth shall thunder, we are here. From land of palm trees to the far-off land of snow, we shall be coming with our torment, with our woe, and everywhere our blood has sunk into the earth, shall our bravery, our vigor blossom forth. We'll have the morning sun to set our day aglow. Our evil yesterdays shall vanish with the foe. But if the time is long before the sun appears, then let this song go like a signal through the years. This song was written with our blood and not with lead. It's not a song that summer birds sing overhead. It was a people amidst burning barricades that sang this song of ours with pistols and grenades. So never say you now go on your last way, though darkened skies may now conceal the blue of day, because the hour for which we've hungered is so near. Beneath our feet the earth shall thunder, we are here. Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg, hat Schimmeln bleien verstellen bleie Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Schau, s wird apoikt on unser Trott mir seinen da. Von grünen Palmenland bis weißen Land von Schnee, wir kommen an mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und wo gefallen ist a Spritz von unser Blut, sprotzen wird durch unser Gwure, unser Mut. Es wird die Morgensonne begilden uns dem Heind, und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Nur heut versammeln wird die Sonne in dem Kajor, wie a Parol soll gehen das Lied von Dort zu Dort. Das Lied geschrieben ist mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Liedl von a Vogel läuft der frei. Das hat a Volk zwischen fallen dicke Wend, das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in der Hand. Da sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg, hat Schimmeln bleien verstellen bleie Tag. Kommen wird nach unser ausgebänkte Schau, s wird apoikt und unser Trott mir seinen da. Thank you.